Good morning. This is your host, Kristi Slaughter, on SuperTalk Saturday Mornings, WFHG 92.9. I'm joined with my next special guest. His name is Christian Paasch. He is with the National Parents Organization of Virginia. Good morning, Christian.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
We have some exciting news in the state of Virginia. Talk to us about what's occurred over the last couple weeks.
The last couple of weeks is really a culmination of the last 3 years of efforts in Virginia, but specifically the last 18 months of deliberate legislative engagement in Virginia. Virginia made history in passing its first pro-shared parenting bill in its history, really. Shared parenting or joint custody had always been mentioned here and there kind of as an afterthought in the past in previous statutes. But what we've now seen is that Virginia has started to update its statutes to be in line with the social science that's out there. There's upwards of 60 studies over the last 3 decades that have all conclusively shown that shared custody or joint custody is best for children in most situations, and we can talk about more what that means. But Virginia is just joining the growing number of states that are changing its statutes to reflect that. And just a first step, Virginia's taken a small step in that, but we're excited about this first step.
Christian, when I was talking to a couple people about the topic for the show before today, they don't have children. They haven't experienced custody, let's say a custody battle or anything like that. And they automatically assume that shared custody is something that happens a lot. And it really isn't. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct on both ends. One, it's correct that shared custody does not happen even close to the majority of the time. And it's also correct that most people assume that it does, right? Because we live in the United States, right? Of course, this is a country of opportunity, of equality and justice and fairness. That doesn't always happen in family court. So without getting into too many details of my own personal experience, because we're always focused on the future, I will say that, as much like anyone else that you spoke to, I assumed that my experience really started 10 years ago, but I assumed that, there would be everything that we're used to seeing. There'd be a right to an attorney, right to a speedy trial, rules of evidence, a very methodical and objective way of proceeding, and unfortunately none of that applies in family court. Family court is very, very different from criminal court. There are different rules, different standards, etc. And it's ultimately a very subjective best interest of the child standards, which are all good things to consider, but the unfortunate bad part about it is that the interpretation of the standards are up to individual judges in individual counties with individual politics and preferences and biases at play, and it can change and differ pretty significantly even in different parts of the same state. And our perspective is that, children are children, and just because one child lives in another part of the state doesn't mean that they should be held to a different standard or that those parents should be held to a different standard just because of where they live.
So, Christian, this bill that Virginia just passed supporting shared parenting, what are some of the details about this new law that you'd like for our listeners to become aware of and be educated about? Absolutely.
So what's important is that before this law passed, Virginia statutes made kind of a passing reference to joint custody. And you'll hear both terms. You'll hear joint custody, you'll hear shared custody, and shared parenting. They all refer to the same principle of physical custody that is split as evenly as possible between the parents. That doesn't mean 50-50. It just means maximizing the time between the parents, as each situation can allow. So in Virginia, they use the term joint custody. In previous statutes, joint custody had been referenced in passing. It was kind of an afterthought that told the courts, hey, by the way, you can consider joint custody if you want, again, kind of as an afterthought at the end of a proceeding. What this new law does is it pulls that consideration to the front, and it actually requires now, it's not just an option, it requires the courts to consider. And those two words are important, requires and consider. So there's no tying a judge's hands here. It's just saying that the courts must consider joint custody as an option at the beginning of a proceeding, right on par with sole custody, which makes sense, right? Each situation is certainly unique and different, and some of those situations can certainly accommodate joint custody, and we want that to be maximized as much as possible because, again, the research tells us that children do much, much better in those situations, even when the parents don't get along. In the long run, that it's better for children to be under that kind of arrangement.
Christian, the two words requires and considers, those are things that I think a lot of us would automatically assume would be done.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That I did too. So did everyone else in our chapter and in other chapters of the National Parents Organization around the country. But it's one of those things that, we all assume that it would be fair and just, and that, that it would be an equitable approach to things and an objective approach to things. But once you get into it, you realize very quickly, and of course by that point it's too late, that is not the case at all. I can tell myself I've had different experiences in front of the same judge, depending on who my attorney was and how well my attorney knew that judge. That should not matter, but it does, and it did, and I learned that, again, unfortunately a little bit too late, but our goal is to just preempt all of that, to take the adversarial nature of this entire process out, because when both parents enter this process, they are told from the get-go, look, one of you is going to be the winner, one of you is going to be the loser, and you have to fight and spend like heck to not be the loser. And that's just not a healthy approach to a situation that's already emotional and combative and anxiety-inducing by itself, right? Divorce or separation is obviously not fun on its own. So there's no reason that we should make it harder than it is already, especially for the children involved. And so all we're saying here is that, for judges to look at a situation and say, hey, assuming both parents are law-abiding, good, decent parents, and they don't pose a threat to themselves or their children or others, then there's no reason we shouldn't maximize the time given a situation, right? Of course, the exemption to all this is, if there's drug abuse, alcohol abuse, or domestic or physical abuse or sexual abuse, then that changes the calculus, right? That's obviously a significant factor. And then the judge still has the full flexibility and really responsibility to protect victims in those cases. But when that's not present, we should maximize the time that the children have with their parents.
Christian, if it's okay with you, we're going to take a quick commercial break. Can you stay with us?
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll be back here in just a moment. This is your host, Kristi Slaughter, on SuperTalk Saturday Mornings, WFHG. Good morning. This is your host, Kristi Slaughter, on SuperTalk Saturday Mornings, WFHG. I'm joined back with my special guest, Christian Paasch. He is the chair of the National Parents Organization of Virginia. We are talking about the bill that just passed in Virginia supporting shared parenting. Thank you for staying with us, Christian.
Absolutely.
If people are just tuning in, we were talking before the commercial break about a lot of the benefits that this new bill will provide for children and families who are going through the process of divorce. If you can give us maybe some information on what this is truly going to mean for families who are going through this process and really how it's going to benefit the children and their lives, because I know you've done a lot of research. You've alluded to maybe that you've had some personal experience. So I'm thinking maybe that's one of the reasons why you're so supportive of this bill. But if you can just talk to us a little bit more in depth about what this is truly going to mean for our families, for our communities, and really our country as a whole.
Yeah, absolutely. So the biggest thing this does for families in Virginia and other states that are pursuing the same goals is that it decreases conflict, it decreases stress, it increases the benefits to children, and quite frankly, yes, to mothers and to fathers, right? Unfortunately, our family courts in general are stuck in what we call this 1950s Mad Men dynamic that assumes if you're a man, well, clearly you want to work all day, and on Friday nights you want to smoke cigars and drink bourbon. That's what you do. And if you're a woman, well, you clearly don't want to have a career. You don't want to advance yourself. You just want to stay home and have children and cook and clean. Obviously, neither of those stereotypes apply to the modern American family anymore. They're just not a social reality. They're not a fiscal reality, right? Most families have dual working parents out of necessity. So, again, this bill is in line with the social science that proves shared custody is best for the majority of situations. And it changes the conversation in family court from a combative, corrosive one to one that says when two parents come into the courtroom, the judge can look at them honestly and say, look, you both are parents now, and when you leave this room, you both are still going to be parents. You're still going to be mom. You're still going to be dad. You're still going to be involved and important to your children when you come out of here. And, oh, by the way, to broaden the conversation a little bit, this applies certainly to same-sex couples as well. So it doesn't matter what a family's dynamic is and whether or not we agree with it or not, that's irrelevant. The point is this child or these children in this family have had the love and benefit of both their parents before the divorce. That should continue to the greatest extent after the divorce. And the last thing, or the final point I'll make on your question here is this law in Virginia is just the first step, right? We want to make further progress. We want to really institutionalize the concept of shared parenting and shared custody in Virginia statutes. It's not some weird kabuki science. This is real. This is a thing, and it's been validated for decades. In fact, other countries have been doing it for a long time, and other states in the country are leading the way on it too. Kentucky just passed what's called a rebuttable presumption. I don't want to get into the legalities of that. It quickly becomes boring. But it's certainly stronger than what we have in Virginia. Arizona is another example where they don't have that term rebuttable presumption, but they do clearly state that the intent with their law is to maximize the time children have with their parents. And that's ultimately where we want to be in Virginia, is to maximize the time children have with both their parents, again, assuming those parents are competent, good, loving parents.
Christian, you are the chairman of the National Parents Organization in Virginia. How long have you been with that organization?
I've been with them just about 3 years. Again, as I mentioned in a nutshell, and my story started 10 years ago when I first entered the family court arena for my older child. And I obviously learned quickly, as I mentioned, that it was not what I thought it was going to be. It was not as equitable as I thought or as fair as I thought it was going to be. And at the time, I sought out some dads groups, obviously, being a dad. But they were, I found them to be angry and frustrated and ultimately unproductive. So I sought out some moms groups. But obviously, I walked in there and they looked at me and said, "Oh, you're not one of us," understandably so. But I found them to be equally frustrated from a different perspective, but equally frustrated and angry at the system. And so I took a break at that point, focused on my relationship with my child. And about 3 years ago, as I mentioned, I came across the National Parents Organization. And what drew me to them and what makes them unique is that they've taken the perspective of uniting men and women, moms and dads, around this subject and saying, we can do much more together than we can apart. And that's how we want to proceed. And that's what we've done here in Virginia. We have moms and dads and stepdads and stepmoms and all kinds of backgrounds, and this issue affects people of all kinds of religious, gender, social, ethnic, socioeconomic backgrounds. It doesn't matter. Every parent loves their child or children. So we've been really encouraged by what we've been able to do here in the Commonwealth, and we want to continue that.
Well, thank you so much, Christian, for being on the show today and all the work that you're doing for our state and for the country. If people want to learn more information, how can they find out about, I noticed the bill, there's been lots of news articles and things written about that, but how can people become involved? Maybe they want to give back or learn more or be part of the support system. How can they go about finding more information and knowledge out about that?
Yeah, absolutely. We're always willing and interested to take on new members. We want to focus on productive engagement, right? We always say we're not a therapy group, but an engagement group. The easiest way to reach me and to find out more about us is on Twitter. If you're on Twitter, and it's at Christian Paasch, all one word, Christian, just like the religion, and Paasch is Paasch. Or you can go to nationalparentsorganization.org, our website, and you can find my email address there.
Well, thank you again for being on the show today. Any changes that you feel like would be interesting to our listeners that you'd like to get the knowledge and information about, just let me know. We'd love to have you back on the show.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Have a great weekend.
You as well.